Starcatcher raises $65 million for space power grid. The laser grid lets operators drop half their solar arrays without touching eclipse margins. 2 constellation builders have already revised their next-generation mass budgets upward for payload instead. That shift lands in 2026 manifests, where each extra communications package adds millions in annual service revenue. Traditional power suppliers lose the upgrade cycle they counted on for the next hardware refresh. The optical receivers weigh less than a single panel, yet deliver continuous power across the entire fleet. GovWell lands $25 million Series A for Gov software. Agencies that switched last quarter cut average permit turnaround from 87 days to 19. The platform's shared data layer now spans county and state lines, something legacy vendors never built. Mid-sized cities using it are already pulling ahead on housing starts because approvals no longer stall at jurisdictional handoffs. That performance gap pressures every remaining on-premise system during the next budget cycle. Watch how many states mandate cross-agency standards once the early movers publish their housing metrics. Nectar Social closes $30 million Series A round. Brands running millions of those conversations now hold first-party intent data that no ad platform can replicate. The operating system routes replies without ever handing the thread back to a human queue. E-commerce teams report a 40% drop in abandoned carts because follow-ups happen inside the same session. That retention lift comes at the expense of retargeting budgets. Expect Meta's Commerce API team to face renewed pressure on data sharing terms by next summer. Rapido raises $240 million led by Process. Unit economics have flipped for fleets that skip the big metros. Rapido's density now supports profitable rides at fares 15% below market. Drivers get steadier hours without the surge chasing that burns out competing fleets. That reliability edge shows up first in retention numbers. City regulators notice and begin weighting utilization in new permit decisions. Ola must either match those bonuses city by city or watch its best drivers migrate before the next financing round. Cerebras IPO debuts with 68% pop. Public shares give Cerebras currency that Nvidia cannot ignore when the next cluster RFP hits. Wafer-scale designs now come with a balance sheet that supports multi-year supply deals without VC bridge rounds. Hyperscalers evaluating both architectures will test whether software abstraction layers mask the hardware difference at 10,000 chip scale. The first pilot that shows lower total cost of ownership lands a reference customer by late next year. Nvidia will reveal its margin defense through bundling moves on the software side alone. Samsung workers plan 18-day strike. Record profits haven't quieted the union demands. The proposed bonus still falls short of what workers received in 2022, despite higher output this year. An 18-day stoppage risks pushing back new HBM chip ramp timelines by at least 6 weeks. That delay hands SK Hynix extra runway to lock in more long-term memory supply contracts before Samsung recovers. Contract manufacturers in Vietnam are already quoting higher rates for emergency capacity. Watch for spot market spikes in the coming weeks. Gambling.com cuts 25% of workforce. The real reduction targets marketing and content teams that drove last year's traffic growth. Those roles disappear while the company doubles down on its owned and operated casino sites. Rivals like DraftKings may see a short-term dip in affiliate referrals once the traffic contracts hit. Expect the firm to renegotiate revenue share deals with operators by the end of Q3. The move also frees cash for share buybacks the board has discussed since the last earnings call. Microsoft rebrands Xbox as Xbox. Uppercase letters alone won't unify the fragmented console, PC, and mobile experiences. The move coincides with new hardware SKUs that blur the line between Xbox consoles and Windows handhelds. Sony now faces pressure to clarify its own PlayStation branding before the next hardware cycle begins next year. Retail partners have already received updated packaging guidelines that drop the old green logo entirely. This could accelerate Microsoft's push to license the brand to third-party device makers in Asia. Sensata launches cash tender offers. The tender covers notes due in 2025 and 2026 at a slight premium to current trading levels. It signals management expects lower interest rates by fall and wants to refinance early. Suppliers to the auto industry should monitor whether Sensata uses the freed balance sheet room for acquisitions in the sensor space. Bondholders now have until June to decide whether to tender or hold for the higher coupon. Watch the company's next earnings for hints on how much debt it plans to retire this year. Nova Limited shares jump 10% on earnings. Process control demand from advanced packaging lines drove most of the upside, not the front-end metrology tools that usually dominate results. That mix shift points to sustained growth through the rest of the year as more chip makers move to chiplets. KLA Tencor now has to decide whether to accelerate its own packaging inspection roadmap or risk losing share in the fastest-growing segment. Nova's gross margins also expanded 2 points, giving it room to cut prices if competition intensifies. Yeti Holdings shares surged 6% on Q1 beat. Last year's freight hedges are now flowing through the P&L and giving Yeti more room on promotional pricing than competitors modeled. That flexibility matters when big box buyers start locking holiday orders. Smaller, cooler brands will have to decide whether to match the discounts or concede shelf space. Either path compresses their own margins before the back-to-school push begins. Retail planners should prepare allocation fights on key SKUs. Resonus earns MTC investment for GovTech. Missouri's pre-seed backing arrives at the exact moment several county governments finalize next year's software budgets. Resonus gains the weeks needed to finish its data migration tools ahead of those deadlines. Once the first live install shows faster approval times, adjacent states gain a template that skips their own lengthy RFP cycles. Incumbents must now accelerate custom development offers to keep existing accounts from testing the newcomer on cost. Tech firms explore orbital data centers. Engineers have long treated latency as the blocker for space-based compute, yet storage and batch processing workloads tolerate the delay. Google's orbital plans target exactly those jobs to cut terrestrial power draw. Providers running similar workloads on the ground will see their own electricity contracts renegotiated downward once satellite links prove reliable enough for daily syncs. Land acquisition teams gain new leverage in regions with stable grid access and fewer water rules. Disguise powers Eurovision with visual tech. Eurovision crews will run the new visual pipeline across multiple arenas without rebuilding control racks at each site. Disguise can leverage that proof point when pitching arena operators who currently maintain separate systems per venue. Rivals face a choice between building equivalent orchestration software or partnering on middleware before the next major awards season forces the issue. Touring production managers should budget for unified licensing fees and shorter changeover windows starting next cycle. NSF launches AgTech Startup Cohort. Teams that finish the Great Plains program will have already run pilots with local co-ops instead of chasing abstract customer interviews. Those relationships translate directly into letters of intent that matter more to Midwest-focused funds than another coastal demo day. National ag tech accelerators may need to add regional partners or risk losing the strongest founders to this more practical track. Equipment dealers gain earlier visibility into which solutions actually fit seasonal cash flows and field conditions. Portland startups see weekly funding activity. Local VCs are circling these Portland rounds with terms that prioritize governance over growth metrics. Founders accepting these terms avoid the dilution that hits companies chasing 2021-style valuations. The move should keep more equity with early employees through the next downturn. Several deals already include milestone-based tranches that force product launches before additional capital lands. That retention edge might finally let Portland teams compete for senior talent against Seattle offices by next spring. Indian startups raise $303 million in week. Travel tech's dominance in this week's Indian raises points to a rebound in bookings data that investors are licensing directly. That clause lets funds monetize usage metrics without waiting for an IPO. This structure changes how Indian founders negotiate with global funds who want data access up front. Pure SaaS players now face pressure to bundle similar data rights or watch valuations compress. Smaller startups without proprietary data could find themselves shut out of the next wave of capital by Q4. Tech stocks slide on hot CPI data. HubSpot and Zoom shares dropping after the CPI print signals that growth investors will demand profitability proofs sooner than expected. That forces both companies to accelerate cost cuts that hit product development timelines by the second half. Enterprise buyers should see more aggressive discounting as a result. Smaller vendors without the same cash reserves will struggle to match those discounts through 2025. This leaves public SaaS names exposed if private players use the window to land larger deals. Amazon devices' focus stays on Alexa. Sticking with Alexa integration means any smartphone ambitions get pushed out at least another 18 months. That hands Google and Samsung extra time to deepen their own voice ecosystems inside Android before Amazon can respond. Hardware partners supplying Amazon should prepare for more accessory volume instead of flagship device components. Retail channels counting on new Amazon hardware launches will need to adjust inventory plans accordingly through next year. The delay also slows advertising revenue from any new form factor. Windows 11 updates reduces the support burden on PC makers who previously absorbed returns from failed installs. That should let Dell and Lenovo cut their certification teams without raising warranty costs. Component suppliers gain breathing room to push driver updates faster, though Microsoft still holds the final gate on stability. Expect Intel and Nvidia to accelerate release cycles now that rollback friction has dropped. The change quietly shifts power back toward the OS vendor in hardware partnerships.